But God sends to the world the realization of that oneness, not through dogma, not through belief, but by inner experience. Good morning and welcome, everyone. It's good for us to be back and with you all. Padma and I were away for a couple of weeks, and sometimes, especially nowadays with travel, which isn't all that pleasant, it's always good to be back. But you know, just like the great thunderheads and clouds that roil and boil in the skies around the world this time of the year in the northern hemisphere, there are great changes taking place. But unlike the frog in the boiling water, we don't necessarily notice. But the changes are nonetheless taking place. Last week was the annual renewal week, spiritual renewal week at Ananda Village, our first community, and a number of us from here were down there together. And there was a great joyful spirit in that we got to see friends from all over the world that we hadn't seen for, well, you know how many years, don't we? There's going to be a void in the history books for years 2020 and 21 when the whole world went dark, in a sense, of being. But so it was very joyful to see our friends. And before that, Padma and I went to Los Angeles to participate in the revival of what they had been doing for a few years before the pandemic. They call Yogananda Fest. And so they had a big facility in Torrance, California, and a full day of classes and speakers and meditations and music and all sorts of wonderful things. So there too, the spirit was that of joyful reunion, to be out and about and to be together with devotees. This new device, it's not really new, but newly being used device of the internet and online is wonderful for reaching friends. It's just such a joy in our classes to have friends from India and Europe and all over the world, but the truth is there's nothing like being together. And so it was last Monday at 4th of July, had the same kind of spirit. We thought not to advertise it in a public way as we used to, trying to be a little bit cautious, but despite our best efforts, people showed up from all over the place, and it was great fun. Picnic, swimming, and so forth. So there is a mood of joyful expectation also in the air, even in the face of great changes that are taking place. We'll never go back to the pre-pandemic world. And so we must therefore prepare. Self-reliance. Well, if there's anything the American myth is steeped in, it's self-reliance. I think of the cowboy, or, you know, and then in entertainment, characters of like, well, I'll disclose my age, John Wayne, Bruce Willis, forget some of the other names suddenly, but you know, that sense of self-reliance is, we admire that. Let's face it, there's nothing wrong with that. And I feel sorry, we feel pity for those who are helpless and hurt and injured and so forth, and I even know some people who enjoy being helpless. But the fact is, humanity respects competence. Now, there was a saint in Italy a couple of hundred years after St. Francis, whom we adore. Yogananda called St. Francis his patron saint. But St. Joseph of Cupertino was notably incompetent. They had to push him through his priestly studies to make him a priest, and he couldn't do anything right, and yet he would say the Mass, which he could barely do, and he'd be levitating in the church in the Basilica at Assisi in front of hundreds of people. But notwithstanding that image of the incompetent, bumbling saint, the truth is more like what Sri Yukteswar said. Sanctity is no excuse for incompetence. What we see in the lives of the greatest saints is that power. Yes, devotion, but that ability to be saints that move the world. And so it is, that should be our aspiration, because that's more in tune with our own cultural consciousness. But like those John Waynes and those cowboys out on the plains, all of which were a myth anyway, but But nonetheless, like that, where does that lead us? Where does the gun-toting survivalist, what is the implication of that? What happened after the United States essentially rescued our allies after 2 world wars? Pride, arrogance, pride before the fall. And though Yogananda said this country has great and good karma for leading the humanity into the age of Dwapara, the age of freedom, the age of energy, we've not done it perfectly. Let me just put it that way. And so self-reliance is an important quality, but it inclines to pride. You know, Sri Yukteswar described the age that we've only just entered into, really. There is a great war going on this planet between old ways of thinking and new ways of acting and behaving, and that's going to go on for a while. But nonetheless, he said that one of the hallmark characteristics of the age that we're in now is the emphasis on self-interest. Another way of putting that is to reflect back maybe to medieval times when you didn't even have a last name. You were John of the Lake or something, you know. You were defined by your tribe. You were defined by your family. You were defined by your occupation. And now, I think of the American Revolution, which symbolizes as well as energized the new awakening towards personal freedom and liberty. However poorly we've manifested it, it's still, that is our destiny. And yet, where does that lead again? It leads towards pride. It leads towards arrogance. So what would be the religion, the spirituality of such an age of self-interest, ego affirmation? Well, what else could it be but self-realization and enlightened self-interest, you see? And so the divine knows what our needs are and has channeled to the world something that goes beyond the institutional dogmas and rigidities of, I mean, isn't it amazing? I don't know if for you, but it's amazing to me that religion, the one thing that could and should unite us, divides us. On my visit to our family, between our events, we had a week in Monterey. Just so happens, coincidentally, Padma's brother Roy lives in nearby Salinas, a few miles away, and my siblings live in Monterey. And so I invited and wanted to be sure to have a kind of reunion. So one of the brothers of mine who is a priest lives in nearby Spokane. I never see him. After all, who wants to go to Spokane? That was a joke. If you're from Spokane, get over it. And so I wanted to make sure he'd be there so we'd have a kind of reunion. We're all getting up there a little bit. And he did nothing but harangue Padma and I and everybody else he could get his mitts on about his religion. And it's not, I don't mind being a Catholic, but this guy's somewhere right of Genghis Khan. He is in this very narrow thing called Latin. They decry the Pope. The Pope's, the anti-Pope, and they do the Latin Mass. All that stuff I grew up with, in the 50s with Bing Crosby and all those old movies about Catholics and stuff. And so he tried his best, but at one point I said a lot of things to him, and some of the things I'm not going to say to you, but I said, that's really small, because his dogma narrows it not only to a small percentage of Catholics, but sends to hell everybody else. And so that's not literally true. He has an excuse or a response to that, of course. These schmucks here, they're good people, but they're not going to be saved by the Lord Jesus Christ. And excuse me, there's So, these things that we have in the world, we need a new consciousness. And so these great battles going on between left and right is so stupid, isn't it? Because both are valid. Conservatism and compassion, rather, and justice, aren't they simply heart and mind? Well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is self-interest, self-promotion, power, money. That's the big deal. But both are valid. And so we make up these battles because it's driven by the ego. And so when the United States was born, I watched a documentary about Ben Franklin by Ken Burns, great, yeah, right. And at the end of the documentary, most of it I knew because I do read things once in a while, but at the end there was something I hadn't heard, which was after the signing of the Constitution, Ben Franklin, who was a publisher and a writer, etc., he was elderly then, he was the elder statesman of his time, came out and published the thing that everyone else knew, but nobody would dare to say. And what was it? That though it was a great victory that these colonies had come together and signed this Constitution, and he praised all that, but the secret sin, slavery. He knew that the score was far from settled, in line and in alignment with the precepts that underlied that Constitution. And they had to yield. When Abraham Lincoln came into office, he did so on the banner, the ticket, to save the Union, not slavery, the Union. And that's what they did with the Constitution. That had to come first. And so the battle goes on, doesn't it? And yet that's part of our destiny, to work gradually, haltingly, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, towards the path of freedom and discernment of the underlying truth of all people. But in order to do that, in order to sign that Constitution, states' rights, the rights of the people, had to be uppermost. And then when people couldn't live up to those dreams, and as Martin Luther King put it, the check bounced, the federal government had to step in at the end of the Civil War. And ever since then, the power of the federal government has increased. But guess what? It's decreasing. The federal government is paralyzed. It's dysfunctional. Even cities are working on climate change because the trajectory of the future, as Sri Yukteswar spoke of, as Swami Kriyananda wrote many times, is towards individual initiative, self-initiative, self-realization. This is the pattern of the future. Voluntary cooperation with high ideals and with the living in harmony with all life, planet, etc., sustainable living, as we now use the term these days, is the paradigm that will save us from destruction. We're not going to get there without a lot of hardship. But this has been the story of humanity down through the ages. I wanted to read to you the story of the Tower of Babel from chapter 11 of Genesis. Babel is a play on words because in the languages of the time it means the gate of God, but at the same time it means confusion. And our arrogance, our striving out of ego alone is so well documented. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, this was after the days of the flood, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, that's Babylonia, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, "Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, "Go to, let us build a city, and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men build. And the Lord said, "Behold, people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off building their city. You see, pride goes before the fall. The thought that we can do it alone has been the message down through eternity. In Swami Kriyananda's magnum opus, The Essence of Self-Realization, Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, excuse me, he had a commentary on, I think it was the 18th verse in the 7th chapter of the Gita, and he told a story that Yogananda's guru told, Swami Sri Yukteswar. And the story went something like this. There was once in the Himalaya a yogi who and you know, all the stories from India from the past all have to do with the power of concentration. And boy, is that an issue in today? People have, can't focus, can't concentrate, can't remember. In past ages, that power of concentration unleashed the power of all nature to people. And so this one yogi had achieved a certain amount of psychic power, and he was rambling around the hills of the Himalayas. And he saw by his psychic insight, his third eye, he saw a magic wishing tree, Kalyana Kapaltaru. And so he sat under this wishing tree, and there he asked for a beautiful palace. And so lo and behold, this beautiful palace emerged right there where he was sitting. And so he walked through the palace, had several stories, but then he thought, gee, it's empty. And so he wished for beautiful furniture. And after a bit he said, well, there's nobody here, it's just me. He wished to have other people there. Lo, there was many other people there. So he decided to wander around his palace and enjoy it for a bit. And he went downstairs, and a big window was open, and he realized he was in the middle of a jungle. You know, that's where it all happened. So he said, he heard the roar of a tiger. He said, oh my goodness, there's a tiger out there. I wonder if he'll jump in the window and eat me. Well, guess what happened? He jumped in the window and ate him. And Sri Yukteswar concluded the story saying, the wishing tree is the spine, is our energy, is our concentration. And we, just like in the ancient tales of East and West, where you get 3 wishes from the genie and you have to watch what you wish for, right? He has that beautiful chant, Sri Yukteswar, desire my great enemy, let pranayam be your religion. Life force within us is the power that is the engine of the entire universe. We live in an age of energy, energy consciousness. I mean, energy's always been there, but we're conscious of it. And so it is, in the spiritual unfoldment of such an age, is an awareness. We have energy healing, for example. We're just on the very early cusp of the awareness of the great power that lies within human consciousness. But unless it is offered in yajna, offered in self-offering, offered in devotion to a higher intelligence, to a higher power, then we, like those people in Babylon, will fall. We have the power to destroy ourselves on this planet. Thousands of nuclear weapons exist, and some people are threatening to use them, have been, always have, since they've been invented. And they may indeed be used. And so we're ushering in a new era. But it takes, it's so interesting to me, because the underlying current of this age of energy, which is more fluid, is also a more feminine energy. The worship of God in the feminine form is also part and parcel of this. But we need to bring the two together. The power and the grace, the reason and the feeling. Because one side of a coin can't call the other side debased. We are one. As the people of, in the lower age of wherein that story took place, was a long arc of descending consciousness. And people, just as we are moving towards a lingua franca on this planet, being English apparently, at one time they thought it might be French, but sorry guys. And so there was a time, some say, that this earth was populated of people who were aware of one another. That's why you see so many amazing things on this planet from ancient times. A golden age is said to have existed and will come again in many thousands of years. And so they had that, but they had lost the intuitive, the heart-based connection with the source of life. And so they fell. We too are right on the cusp of that. And so it is God sends, not just uniquely or exclusively, that would be just more dogma, wouldn't it? But God sends to the world the realization of that oneness, not through dogma, not through belief, but by inner experience. And it's no coincidence that that came to this country, whose destiny is to usher in that age of self-interest, hopefully enlightened. You know, the founders of this country spoke openly of the fact that it wouldn't work unless the body politic were educated and somewhat enlightened, meaning not selfish and corrupt, as we unfortunately see so much of today. And so we have, like, what's that guy's name? I can't never say the China's guy's name, Xi Jinping. Anyway, he's openly touting the success of their system, and there are millions of people who want to trade freedom for security. This has always been the issue. We're used to being brutalized. We're used to having kings and dictators and warlords. But we're trying, at least in this country and a few others like us, to usher in something else. But it's deeply embattled. We individually need to change. That's what we represent here, you see. And people are getting it. I was talking to my niece in Monterey, and she's a great lover of cities. She lives in San Francisco with her beautiful daughter, and they have a wonderful life there. And I remember getting in an argument with her years ago. I used to be more argumentative than I am now, but anyway, you know, about cities. I mean, I've never liked cities. I've traveled all over the world, and I could care less about cities. But she didn't like that. And right after that, I wrote a blog article about that, and she got wind of it, didn't like it. Anyway, so she says to me, or not, actually to her father, my brother, she says, you know, Dad, she says, I think we should buy land in the country and start a community. I'm thinking, what? I'll tell you, it's out there. You ask Christy. We're getting inquiries about our community from left and right and all over. This isolation of the pandemic has awakened people to what amounts to their psychological isolation. The wonderful diversity of America, which I welcome and which and a lot of people don't welcome, I admit, but you know, needs a counterbalance. You don't know your neighbors. You don't know if it's a guy with a gun. You don't look at the range of values. Yeah, it's freedom. Hey, I'm all for it. But what do people of refined consciousness automatically seek to do? Well, here we are. We seek one another. The Yogananda said that the idea or the existence of intentional communities would spread like wildfire. It occurred to me a couple of years ago in a talk I gave at a prior Spiritual Renewal Week, and with fires burning all over California, I began to question, why the heck did he use the word wildfire? In California, no less. Well, I think I know the reason. It's taken a year or two for me to convince myself of it, but I'm convinced of it. The world, because the community, the spread of communities will take place in the wildfire of chaos, confusion, and destruction on one level or another. Because people don't do what is right, they do what they have to. I'm speaking of the broader populace, of course. I think of pre-World War II. I mean, I tell my age, but I show my age, not that I was alive then, but I grew up with that consciousness. I think of what happened in America, in Britain, in France, as Hitler gained power and so forth. Not in my neighborhood, not here. Can't happen here. Yeah, well, Somebody said the other day, I thought this was lovely, I just heard it yesterday, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Isn't that a good one? I'm going to hang on to that one. And so a great change is coming on this planet in human consciousness. You and I and millions like us are part of the movement and awakening of consciousness that is necessary for both the upliftment of humanity and for our movement towards soul freedom, union with God, self-realization. And it's a both and, you see. As we strive individually, and then as we strive with others of like mind, a powerful force. Every great movement in history has been done by a handful of people. 12 minus 1, 11 disciples, as just one example. A few disciples of Buddha. In art, think of the composers of the 17th and 18th century, of the left bank, the great playwrights, all the great movements. In science, you know, this is how it works. Individual initiative. And we are much blessed. All of us are greatly blessed in material prosperity, yes, and in health and psychological wholeness, but also in the inspiration of high ideals. And as such, in a way, we have a mission. And that mission is our salvation, but it's a great contribution to others. We are known for quoting an old Chinese proverb, may you be born in interesting times, and we have been. And so we should celebrate the opportunity that our own karma has drawn to us, to be with one another, to practice meditation and seva service in the great work that is trying to be birthed on this planet at this time.